Things have changed a lot because of MacArthur, and I think the experience that a lot of defenders' offices have, and really criminal justice systems have, is that there are silos that develop, right? There's a law enforcement silo and a mental health silo, and defenders and prosecutors and law enforcement. And MacArthur's given us an opportunity to break down some of those silos, because there's a lot more direct communication and more of a thought that instead of looking at just this tiny little piece of the criminal justice system or our tiny case that we're handling right this moment, we can look a little bit bigger at the whole system and see if we can figure out ways to do things better than we've been doing them traditionally. One of the first things we did in the whole process too is we did get all the stakeholders in the criminal justice system together, and we did a system mapping exercise where we looked at everything from the first police contact all the way through the completion of a case and tried to look at what that looked like in our jurisdiction, because places do things similarly yet differently, right? You have to look locally at how you do it. And then if you then go beyond the mapping exercise and try to look at exactly what you're doing at different pieces on that map, you can realize sometimes things are happening that you weren't even aware of. Like your perception of something may be different than the reality once you have some data to back it up. And once you've identified that as being maybe a gap or something that's inefficient, not working as well as it could, then it gives you the opportunity to figure out, well, what can we do to make it better?
Different players, law enforcement, judges, people to the table, even the ACLU to kind of work through some of the problems, some of the issues that we're having. And that is extremely helpful because we wouldn't be there otherwise, right? We might not be sitting there having these conversations, these discussions.
I think we've had a similar experience because all the stakeholders have been brought to the table through this process. There's just a lot more communication, and what you realize is, of course, there's going to be differences of opinion, and of course the system is adversarial, but sometimes the goals or the outcomes that people are looking for are not that different. So for example, with law enforcement, they would like to see somebody not return to the system also, okay? And what we figured out by talking to law enforcement is they have real limited options on what they could do if they ran into somebody in a situation and they needed to remove them from that situation. Often the decision was, do I arrest the person and take him to the jail, or is there something else we can do with that? Jails have been asked to do way too many things. Jails are being asked to do too many things because they're being asked to be detox facilities and mental health facilities, in addition to just housing somebody pre-trial. And our sheriff has been very vocal, wanting some alternatives also to that, because while they do as good of a job as they can with detox and recovery and mental health issues, that is not the ideal place for really the majority of the people that are in our jail.
The jails have been filled with the mentally ill, and a very large percentage of the population are people who are there because of mental illness and some conduct on the street that got them into the jail in the first place. But I think everyone at the table now agrees that's not the proper use of the jail. Those people don't belong in there, and we need to find ways to divert them out of the system and find more humane ways to deal with folks like that.
It's the cost, and it's also the ultimate outcome, okay? So when you have such mass incarceration and such a volume of people churning through the system, and people often will call it like a conveyor belt. We were saying last night it's more like a carousel, because unfortunately you see the same people returning to the system over and over and over again. And part of the reason for that is because you may be addressing this particular moment in time, or this short moment in time where they may have violated the law, but you've also not addressed any of the underlying issues that may have made that person sort of get into that situation in the first place. And if you don't treat any of those underlying issues, then the likelihood is the person is going to return to the system again. We're working on a project which is called the Opportunity Project, where it is using social workers to be paired with attorneys to talk to felony defendants within hours of their first appearance in court. And when I first talked to two attorneys that are in that courtroom where they're seeing the felony arraignments, the two attorneys had been with our office for more than 40 years. They've been doing things one way for a long time and doing it very well. And the idea of introducing them to the concept of social workers talking to their clients, I think fell flat initially. But now what's happened over time is they've really grown to embrace the idea, and they love it. And the reason why they like it is that it used to be that when a client first came out, they knew very little about this person, okay? They knew their criminal history and they knew what charge they had, and not a whole lot else, okay? We have a risk assessment tool, so they had that information. Now what's happening is by the time the individual comes back to court the second time, they have a lot more information about the person through our social worker project. And because of that, they now have different ways to advocate for the client, whether that is to have them released from custody with a plan in place, or if it just affects the trajectory of the case and maybe just ends up with a better outcome, like more misdemeanors instead of felonies. People are not languishing in a jail pretrial, then it's less likely their lives are destabilizing. They're not losing jobs, they're not losing apartments, they're not being taken off their medications if they have that with the mental health community. And so that humane treatment that he's talking about, I think is an important piece. I want to see our attorneys have more time on each individual case and with each individual client. I told him last night that there was a period of time in around 1984 where the former chief told me that they changed the number of cases were getting assigned to attorneys, and at the time you could have 2 trials scheduled in a day, and they went to 4 trials scheduled in a day. And he said there was a near mutiny that people were like, how could we possibly handle this many cases? Well, now looking back at that, it seems to me that what a luxury only 4 cases would be in a day, right? And so while we may never get back to 4, I would like to have significantly less cases than we do right now so that we have the time to really devote to the individuals. And by getting people out of the criminal justice system, by diverting them or deflecting them from the system at the front end, it would allow us to have less of a caseload. And that's a benefit not just to us, but when we talk about unlikely allies, that is the same thing that the prosecutors should be happy with, so that they can prioritize what cases they want to put their time and resources into. And then, similarly, with judges, it'll reduce docket sizes. So I think there's a lot of benefit to sort of taking a harder look at who should be in the criminal justice system and who should be served in a different model.
There's a lot going on right now. It's actually, for me, one of the most exciting times to be in criminal justice, because there are so many people now. Everybody wants to be involved in changing the system, improving the system, politicians, everyone.
I just appreciate that we're being invited as defenders to be at the table and to be part of these conversations. And people aren't just giving us lip service. We are part of the core team that is looking at these things. So we've met at the national conferences where we bring 6 or 7 or 8 people to the conferences, and we're being one of those parties that's being invited. And so I think that we're an important part, but also a valued part of that whole discussion.
You know, one example was the Allegheny County Chief Defender talked about how they're actually going into court to reduce the length of probation on cases, and that was actually brought to their attention by probation themselves. It's like, wow, that's interesting. Why are we keeping people on probation for 5 years or 3 to 5 years? If they're doing well, why don't we, join hands with probation and bring those people back to court and terminate their probation, get people off their caseload that don't need to be on their caseload so they can focus on the few individuals who are struggling and maybe need more services or whatever it takes. And that to me is a big solution. And there's a lot of things like that happen in these conferences that I think are really important and would not have happened without MacArthur and NLADA.